Greetings, adventurers, travelers, and fellow keepers of the lake. Welcome to the first episode of our new podcast that is called Lakeforge. It is the forge under the lake of creative thinking that weaves the stories and creative ideas that we then keep in the vault beneath the keep. So I'm here with my very good friend and one of the players in our main campaign right now, which is called Krampus's Code. We've been to this trip to Egypt and the sea was closed. Yes, that is something that apparently can happen. So we were stuck in the apartment talking to each other and we thought like, wow, these topics are for sure some good podcast material. So here we are. Today's topic will be about emergent world building and metafiction. And with that, I will give my friend the word to introduce himself to the extent that he wishes, and then we will start rambling into your little ears.
I'm Lazar, wannabe literary theorist, and I'm a person who really found a TTRPG as a new hobby of mine, and as I think that really brings a lot of unexpected creative energy in my life. And I want more people to see TTRPGs as a form of art, which it truly is if it is executed and played correctly. I think that I'm a lucky one to meet one extraordinary dungeon master.
Oh, thank you.
But it's true, honestly. Like I went into the hobby like maybe 7 years ago, like most people do. Classical fantasy world D&D experience, and it was good. I can say. I mean, it definitely hooked me. I wanted to play more and more games, even though my ex DM was a little bit, strict and some would say cruel, if that's a thing.
No, I totally relate. My first DM is also pretty strict. I mean, I don't know if he's gonna agree with that. I'm sure he will be listening, but yeah, he can be cruel. I mean, my gnome character lost an arm in the last session, so yeah, you can see that.
Yeah, I also lost my sight a couple of sessions ago. That's a cruel thing too, but I'm fine with it. I mean, like, it really makes sense. You miss cruelty sometimes. We all like that, right? But generally, like, I love this new approach, and I'm also a board gamer for a while. I like to collect board games, and I like to try new board games. There's no such thing as one board game that's like my favorite one, and I really liked your approach because you also like to test new systems, and I think each system, even though it's not the one that really fit the let's say our needs and wishes and what we want from these types of game, it always brings some new aspect to the game. May produces some new satisfactions. I definitely like that. Experimenting and seeing experiencing things from different angles definitely adds to the overall experience.
Yes, I would completely agree. And I would like to tie to the fact you said that TTRPGs are an art form when played the right way. I don't think there is a right way to play them. I think, okay, there is a wrong way to play them, and that would be to have the DM that is incomplete, like us versus them mindset and is trying to win the game. I think the wrong way to play TTRPGs is to try to win them, to win at TTRPGs. But from my point of view, there are different schools of thought. And yes, our cruel and strict DMs are doing something that has been done for years in the past by people much older than us. And when you look at the history of TTRPGs, you see that it came from this wargaming type of approach, and narrative is something that was added afterwards, and it evolved and evolved. And today we see a lot of people still trying to do a more of like a simulation approach, which is fine. That is something that we consider as the main way to get people immersed into the campaign. But what I started doing, and predominantly because my brain can't simulate stuff, I'm very bad at keeping track of arrows or the weight in your backpack. So I started experimenting with bending the rules, with changing them overall, or taking something from another game, and that's when I was introduced into to this community of hackers, mostly through Runehammer. When I started doing it, and I'm very lucky to be playing around the table, having physical games, and to have players that are open to these sorts of experimentations. So when I started doing it and people started liking it, that was just, it opened the floodgates, and here we are talking about that. And I think the approach that we take is unique because we all know that for us, and aligning expectations is important in TTRPGs, of course, and a lot of groups don't communicate this well enough. But for us, narrative is something that we want to be in the first plan. But we don't want to explicitly play games like Powered by the Apocalypse games that are taking away all the math, taking away the tactical thinking, and leaving the narrative. We want the combination of both. So we're always trying new systems, trying new things that we can like plagiarize for our own sake and make the perfect experience for each night. So yeah, that's what this episode should be about. I mean, we're just talking, but that's where that emergent world building comes into play.
Well, I don't agree about just liking it. I think that actually our group is more like loving it or even like becoming obsessed about it. But all in all, like we really like to experiment with new things and to see what all kinds of satisfaction you can get from this creative artistic process, and then that's the moment when we come to metafiction. And just to explain what we mean when we say metafiction, it's usually perceived as a self-conscious art, when text or any type of art, your favorite show, when it says, see you in the new episode, that's, breaking the fourth wall, and it's a contact between the author and the reception or audience. In TTRPGs, it's completely different model. You don't really have the audience. I mean, yes, you might have if you are streaming the game, but generally the players, the participants are also the co-creators. DM is also part of the audience in certain moments when players take over. So
Especially, there is a saying that goes like, the camera follows the players. So when they decide to switch the scene, that is when you switch the scene. When they decide to do something that you couldn't predict, in a way you're experiencing the story as a DM, something that is unexpected. And yes, that is why people say, okay, don't write the whole plot. If you want to write the whole plot, write a book and don't DM. And this improvisational style, I like it more because it makes me the audience as well. And I have these memories of consuming some art form, some creation that we made around the table. Even though I'm the DM, I don't feel like it's my creation. It's a creation that doesn't exist without the players. So the boundary of like who really is the creator there is a bit blurred, I would say.
but everything said and done during the game is a type of fiction. Everything that we perceive as a fiction should be just taken as it is. So while we play the game, we say things, we do things, and we don't question those things. They just happened. Nobody asks us if they are true or a lie, if they fit the story, and we actually feel something about it. It's good. It's what art should do. So I would say, when it comes to fiction, and we are all creating fiction, it doesn't matter if you made up those stories before the game or you improvised. Actually, I would say that improvisation kind of make it more realistic, because if you improvise, and of course players see those things, and especially if they play with you for a while. For me, those moments are more realistic ones, ones that actually move me, because it came straight, unfiltrated, straight from your imagination. And that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to make our imaginations interact, and that just might be the deepest social interaction I have ever experienced.
For sure. And I think the reason why some improvisational moments make sense and feel more natural is because we as DMs sometimes forget the fact that, as Runehammer says, and I will mention Runehammer a lot because, inspiration and all that. Runehammer says ordinary things are easy and like weird, and unordinary things are hard. And for DMs, we sometimes forget that we don't need to prep ordinary things. And sometimes when we do prep them, they feel a bit forced. My favorite example is I was reading this Call of Cthulhu module, and there is like a room, and there is a big wooden stick on the ground. And in the module itself, it's written like you can roll. I don't know what skill, like survival or something, to figure out from which type of wood it's made. Why would I even want to know that? I will just make up a type of wood on the spot. It just takes unnecessary brain power to remember that. It takes unnecessary space in the book. But I think even for me, sometimes when I sit down to prep, I have a tendency to prep things that are ordinary. But now when I've had a lot of purely improvisational games, I think prepping things that are hard for you to remember is where your like mental muscles should be working to figure out what it is and to write it down so you remember it during the session. But I would like to tell people how we approach it, and for you to tell me, is this considered a form of like meta gaming or even metafiction, where yes, NPCs are not talking to the players. So from that point of view, the art form is not talking directly to the audience. But we figured out that I really struggle with naming things in the world. So at one point, players started like jumping in and giving names to things, and I just took it as the grand truth. Like, why is something that I say true and something that the players come up with is not true? It's like I'm saying my imagination is of bigger authority than yours. Doesn't make sense for me. So I said, okay, if you call this man John, he will be called John for the rest of the campaign until the end of time. And people started liking that. People started liking the impact they have on the world. And I think the pinnacle of that is with our current campaign, where we had the session 0 that was not only built around creating characters, but was also focusing on characters, building the aspects of their life and the world around them. My idea was that the characters should be familiar with their own neighborhoods. They should have their friends and family and have a favorite place to go out and drink or whatever. And in that sense, players became very much a part of the world building process. And now we have a world that we all feel so much more tied to, and we're not afraid to change some ideas. And you mentioned you went blind in one of the previous sessions. So we sat down and said in the middle of the session, like, okay, what makes sense to exist in this world for blind people? I mean, it's 2055, it's a game in the future. So we needed to sit down and think of some inventions that would make living blind more manageable. And also we needed to discuss mechanics, like how from a mechanical standpoint would you live in this world? How do you make it still fun for the player that is blind? Because let's face it, removing a sense of smell in TTRPGs is not that important. I mean, it adds to the game when you remember to describe it, but on the other hand, sight is something that completely mechanically changes everything. So in some games that and I'm getting to my point here, in some games that I played, the DM will never show you that they are not ready for something. They will never show you that their paper is blank. And they will try to simulate that they're the all-knowing. And when I first started playing as a player, I really thought that the DM is all knowing. Like, imagine the processing power that this guy has to just have this all in their mind. But the moment when we confess to the players that we don't have everything ready and give them the ability to world build, for example, one of our players says, there is a bar called Sickness. I'm going there in the middle of the game. And I cannot argue with that. The character talked to me in a way, and me as a DM, and said, this place now exists. So they're acknowledging the game as a game, and they're acknowledging that they are also the authors. So that line also blurs. And I'm asking a bunch of questions here, but basically, question one is, why did we end up in a situation where simulating the all-knowing being is considered a prerequisite for immersion? And the other question is, if a character talks to me as a GM, is that a form of metafiction, or is that something else? I call it emergent world building because as things are happening, we add to the world. It's not just me, but everyone at the table. But yeah, those are my questions.
Well, I don't think that's the best example of metafiction, because their imagination should be as important as the GM's. Of course, they are usually not used to get involved in the creative process. They think, GM should prepare most of the stuff and everything. But if you have players who are really willing to add to the world, for example, like in the campaign that we play at the moment, a lot of players actually added to the world building by creating the gadgets that they thought would be a necessary part of their everyday life. For example, one good friend of ours who really, really liked alcohol, he invented the alco vape. I think that, a vape that has alcohol in it and you can get drunk with vaping. I mean, such a convenient thing, right? And why wouldn't it exist in 2055? I mean, it makes sense. So I feel like there's always a space for players to add to the world building. They are just not used to, or maybe not really trained to do such things, because as classical DMing doesn't really allow those things. Maybe they don't feel free to do such things, but I really think it's a very, very valuable habit, and I think a good GM should always award those moments, and that's definitely happening in our campaign. And I think it's one of those things that actually made me think of TTRPG as a form of art that is not yet perceived as a form of art, even though new modern postmodernistic theories actually talk about art that way, that you would feel like, oh, these definitions are actually describing TTRPGs. And when it comes to metafiction, there's some moments that we all forget about. For example, the main metafictional moments are those when players actually play. I mean, the mechanics, the rolling of dice, that's actually metafiction, because something that's happening in the real world affects the story, while also the story, while you play, some moments in the story, they require rolling, they require real life involvement so that they can, so that story can continue. And I really think we all forget about those moments, like something that we are really used to doing, and we don't think about it that way. And yeah, most of the time it's just boring. It's something that we have to do. So, I mean, some epic moments, some very important roles. Of course, you won't just take that easily. It's gonna be an important role. Everybody's gonna look at the table and see the number. But I still think it's something that we just forget about, because mechanics are usually boring. They're not really thing that adds to the story.
I mean, as a GM, I would argue that mechanics are not boring. But anyway, so we want to make a distinction here between metagaming and metafiction. So when you say, this is a very interesting like a very thought-provoking thing. So we are saying that the act of us rolling dice and doing something that affects the world, and we're doing it in real world, is called metafiction here, right? And we are saying when we talk about metagaming, that's using knowledge that you have outside the game to influence things inside the game. So there is a bit of an overlap when you use these very broad definitions, because in a sense, you're using the knowledge of your role. Well, basically, the GM is using the knowledge of your role to interpret the result. So there is a bit of an overlap, but these two should not be confused. If we say that in a sense that the work of art is communicating to the audience, and you mentioned breaking the fourth wall, if we're considering that metafiction, do we have any example from the game where
I would give one great example.
Yeah.
For example, you play the game, you tell the story, players are really engaged in those moments, and then you just say that there's a mirror in front of him, and in the mirror he sees a person, and that person, the description of that person really fits his own description. You don't have to mention it, but he sees himself in that world.
as the player or the character?
No. That would be just a normal thing. That wouldn't be a metafiction if the character sees himself in a mirror. It would be a very interesting thing if a character sees a player in the mirror in front of him. That would be a nice example of the metafictional moment, for sure.
Interesting. And yeah, I had this question. I forgot to ask it, but we are, as we mentioned, somehow taught that D&D should be perceived as like you have the DM who knows the whole world and is just presenting this world in a very believable way to the players, and then the players can only act upon the world through their characters, and we are blurring a line there a bit with all this making up stuff with the DM on the fly. So, and I would just add one more example to how we do it. So I did a video, I think it was my second or third video I ever did on inspiration tokens, where I said, okay, D&D has inspiration, other games have like hero coins or this and that, and it is used to re-roll a die or to like stop dying if you're down, and like just instead of a death save. But I use them as bargaining tokens with the DM. That's how it all started for me, I think. You have this token that you get when you're like going out of your boundaries and being like more creative and imaginative than usual. The GM rewards that with an inspiration token, and then you can use the inspiration token to like just say, okay, my favorite example is a guard is going through, like you're in a cell and the guard is patrolling, and you say, can I give an inspiration token for the guard's keys to come out, like fall down from the guard's pocket to the floor? And then I would say, well, the inspiration token is not enough, but let's say you make a distraction, roll me some dice, and we will see if the dice say like that you made a good distraction, the keys will just fall on the ground. If your roll fails, the keys will still fall down, but the guard will come back in, let's say, 5 minutes. So in a way, you're pushing the story in your preferred direction as a player using this token. And I think the first time I saw this concept was in Savage Worlds. They have bennies, which are like benefit tokens. And now, why is this not something that we see more with like traditional D&D? Why is this something, not only traditional D&D, but you told me about this happening to other forms of art as well, where we are expecting realism so we can confirm that something is genuine, that something is really immersive.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's how world art actually started. The first way of seeing art is actually a simulation called mimesis. So the artist who can simulate the real world better in his form of art is a better artist. And we're definitely not trying to say that particular part of art is not important. It just can't be the main part of art. It can be the main value of art, because if that was the main value, then the best artist in the world would be just the one that can, for example, like paint so realistically that you cannot distinct his painting from a photo. And we can all agree, today, that's just not art. It's a cool skill, but not a
If you
pure art.
paint a forest and it's so realistic that birds hit your painting, that sort of stuff.
I mean, it's still art. I just can see it as the purest form of art. It's after some time it just becomes boring. So everybody can do a very good simulation. So what? And that's where it all started developing. Like, okay, so we are not just gonna simulate the real world. We're gonna simulate the inner world. The things that are happening with our emotions. The life that's happening inside of all of us. So the art became something, like, if you can make other person feel what you feel through your art, then you're a good artist, and so on. I mean, that development took a while, and we can talk about that, and that definitely requires special episodes, even couple of episodes of this podcast just to explain all of that. But like today, we consider art as a process more than a product. So for us, just like being creative in some way, telling a story, interesting way, feeling some emotions through that process, that's already art. And also, like, what I personally like about TTRPGs is that there's a space for any kind of art. So you're good at voice acting, here you go. You have a plenty of
Critical
space
role,
to,
I mean.
yeah, critical role for sure. But I mean, like, there's a lot of things, like anything. Like, you play guitar very nicely. You can be a bard who plays guitar, and you can use that skill through entire game. You can be a nice illustrator. You can make a nice illustration of your character and present yourself nicely. Or you can present maybe some important places of yours in the world you're playing. TTRPGs actually allow you to be creative in all ways you want to, but they don't require any specific skill. It's very nice if you are creative, if you are involved, and if you have a group of 4 people who are really involved, and they are like free to say whatever comes out of their minds. And I really think every person in the world is actually creative. There's just people who really filtrate that creativity, let's say.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I'm astounded with the amount of people that I have introduced to this. Oh, I'm playing with volume. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We're doing this for the first time ever. But yes, I've introduced so many people from my life to this hobby that were never even like considering something like this, even thought it was a bit like cringy and strange. But when they come to the table and you set the stage, you're silly, and they feel comfortable. It's astounding how people just get free. The main example is my sister's boyfriend. He is Egyptian, and he lived in Egypt all his life. And I had this preconceived notion of him not being able to grasp the scenery. I was like, how do you describe Germanic church or architecture that we visualize when we think of medieval fantasy to someone who has never seen it? How does he see that? The imagination is so different, the inner imagery is so different, that I was even a bit scared if that's gonna influence the play. And also, they played some board games, but they never like invested time into something that's pen and paper. So we go to Egypt now. That was a couple of less than a week ago, I think, when we came back. Like, we came back 2 days ago, and we had 6 sessions of index card RPG, and this man was playing Goblin Monk, I think. I have never seen a better roleplay of a Goblin Monk. It was so good. And of course, they got hooked, so my mission is completely accomplished as a DM there. But Oh my god, like that was so unexpected. And all the crazy things he did as a goblin monk. You know how people test their boundaries when they first start playing? Some become murder hobos and start killing everything until they see the consequences. He was actually giving debuffs to himself. Like there was a flash of light, he would just start role playing that he was blind for the next 5 minutes, for example, even though that has no mechanical benefit to him. Quite the contrary, he was still doing it, and it made the narrative more rich. So I will for sure remember those sessions, and I would think that if those sessions were made into like a show or a book or anything, that character would be loved by the audience, loved by many. Also, another example, I have this friend from high school that started playing with us, had a couple of sessions with both of us, and if you ask like what type of art is closest to his heart, he's a musician and he's never played or loved any board games. I tried making him play board games with us for a long time, never wanted to be a part of it. He saw the channel, he saw that I'm very passionate about this, that I turned my apartment into a studio. So it was like, can we try it? We had one small session, like an hour, one-on-one. He was completely blown away. Next time he comes, he was a bit silent, testing the waters and everything. Session after that, he decides to play, he said, damsel in distress. We were playing Call of Cthulhu, so he was a damsel in distress. He decided to play a different gender, in a different time, in a different world. And yes, interesting moments came from that. So I completely agree that we all have that creative thing in our minds, but from the point where our toys are taken away and we are introduced to the real world, we kind of forget about it. Even I think of myself as a very creative and artistic person, and I had this whole period in my life where I never understood how to get that out into the world until I was introduced to TTRPGs. So I think it unlocks that childish creativity that's in all of us.
I mean, I would actually add even more extreme idea regarding that matter. I would say that actually, unlike many other forms of art, for example, okay, my profession was about reading and criticizing books. There was a lot of cases when I would read a really, really good book and I would just say to myself, damn man, you won't ever be able to create such a wonderful thing. And that actually kills my creative energy at the moment. While I think TTRPGs, even when we brought new players to the game who definitely feel, like a little bit inexperienced, their role playing is not at the same level as ours, and it's mostly because of the same reason. They just don't feel comfortable, free yet, and it happens through the game. It really happens, and watching that development really is a priceless thing. It really brings a lot of satisfaction to the group. I think honestly that TTRPGs in so many ways boost your creative energy. They, after playing a game, you really feel like, oh man, I can be, creative in other aspects of life as well. So also we didn't really finish our idea when it comes to simulation. I didn't want to say simulation is not important, like that's definitely a thing when it comes to TTRPG games. You like them because they are realistic in some different way. Even though we play a fantasy, world setting, you still, every creature has the same elements of inner life. All of us do, even if you are elf, you have feelings, you have pretty much, similar or same problems. That's all realistic in a way, and all of that we can say it's, if it's a good game, it definitely is a good simulation too. But simulating the real life shouldn't be the main focus. That's what we are trying to say. There's no such things as a wrongly role played elf or dwarf, and expectations per se are not bad. We all have expectations. That's something we just cannot, just delete or ignore. And in a way, they are good, because if you recognize the expectation of a player, that's a wonderful, space for you to break those expectations. And even though, some players, I would say, some unexperienced players, because they, of course, when you run into this hobby, of course, you have some expectation. It's a good thing, to fulfill some. But I think if you recognize a expectation of your player, it's a really good sign. This is a space for me to shine. I can really destroy those expectations in an interesting way. And most of the time, even if the first reaction of a player is not, so well, it's still a reaction. And that's the art, because if you manage to, get some kind of reaction, a feeling, even if it's a negative feeling, at first moment, after the game, after the session, like for example that session when I lost my sight, it was not a favorite thing of mine. But now, I mean, after that happened, we discussed, like Andrea said, we discussed the ways of me returning, regaining my sight. And after a while, I actually, like, now I think I don't want to see ever again. I want to play blind. That so, even when things you don't expect happen to you. I mean, maybe this was not the best example, but it was the, most recent example of mine. I would still say, it's a nice thing whenever you make a reaction, like in impactful moment. That's a good thing. That also, says a lot about, like, players involvement in the game, because when they are involved, they are changing the world, and world changes them. Those changes are bigger than, in cases where, world is as it is, and they're just trying to fit into that world, or make their way.
I just want to add to that argument that elves have the same problems and emotions as humans, and that makes them almost simulated. I think when we are defining simulation, we want to say that the DM puts some rules and some groundstones to their world. For example, in my world, there are no elves, and in another world, maybe dwarves speak Japanese. It's not that we want to simulate our world, but when you create the foundation of your world and you're very strict to it, and you're trying to simulate all the physics and chemistry and count the arrows and do the whole survival aspect, sometimes that is amazing. I like playing those games, but I don't enjoy when there is no space for me to influence that outside of the game. I think that might be some insecurity of mine or just taste. But yeah, I just wanted to say that when we say simulation, we're not talking strictly about simulating real life or like the tropes from the fantasy works we already consumed. But like when you start playing in a certain game, those foundations are unbreakable. And of course, some foundations should be unbreakable, but I don't like when that's so strict that there is no space for you to question the world in a way. The other thing about the expectations and breaking them, yeah, when you break the expectations for the first time and you see the awe on their faces, that's priceless. But then you have the veterans that have an expectation of you breaking expectations, and then you just go with what is a logical way to happen, and they're like, wait, how? I expected this boat to sink. I was sure this cave is gonna collapse. You just say no, you walk out. A healthy mix of both is what will keep the most people.
We just came to the first conclusion of this podcast. Breaking expectations in recognizing expectation at first are definitely, one of the most valuable skills of good GM, and I would say of a good artist too, because each good artist who was breaking expectations actually was the, creator of a direction of art. That would be definitely something you guys should think about. I even think, like, the players also have pays for breaking expectations, especially when it comes to the reactions to the problems. So most players actually think of like, how should my character behave in that certain situation? But I think like they should just be, more free. Like, I feel like my character should now do something that he never did before, because that's what we do. And that's when, simulating is actually a good thing. Because if you think about life, sometimes there's a lot of things happening in life that we don't feel like they're okay to happen in the game, because that's not you, we don't see you that way. But actually the things you do define you some way, right? Like all the things you do are actually part of the story that you would like, somebody to say about you. We our identities, and the only way to identify ourselves is to tell a story. And we are the creators of our life, of our story. And why should it be any different in the game? So if you feel like doing something that, maybe is not the thing that archetype of your character should do, breaking expectations at some point, it really makes sense. We do it in important parts of our life. Sometimes we just surprise ourselves too. So that's okay thing. It's not just a thing that only GM can do. Players should definitely surprise themselves and the others.
I would divide that into two categories, for example. When the players break the expectations of the DM, and when the players break the expectations of other players. Of course, a mix of that is when the stories that we tell afterwards are born. But breaking the expectations of a GM, I had players that would meet outside the game and craft a plan and then try to not tell me that plan so I can't be ready for it. This is something I really despised at the beginning of my GMing career, because I really wanted to be like at least think about the outcomes. Now I would encourage it so much, because that shows that people are engaged. It shows that they're thinking about the game outside the game. And for us GMs, I heard this somewhere, I can't remember where, but for us as GMs, this is our primary hobby. We use so much of our time and our brain matter to think about the game, to think about the mechanics, to world build, to do all sorts of things. And when you see the players whose hobby is just like, we will go on Sunday or Friday and have our weekly game, for them it is not the primary thing they think about all the time. So seeing that involvement, it really makes my heart warm. And to go back to the topic of players subverting expectations of other players, that is something that I've included in pretty much every game. I use the concept of dark secrets, but I just use that term because that's the term I read in the cult book. These are secrets that are deeply personal to your character. I did ... is the best format because that gives you a lot of information. And I like to call them dark secrets still because it gives me the idea what that character considers dark. And that also gives me a window into seeing how much is okay with that player to be happening around their character. We play a lot of horror, that this is where it comes from. So if I'm playing a horror game and I see the dark secrets, some will have much more, I would say, dark and grotesque secrets than others, and you can read from that. And then my friend Rich just released a video on Renegade Rolls about revealing your secrets. It's a good thing. I will certainly link to that. Revealing your secrets as a player is one of the best way to subvert expectations of the party, change the party dynamic. A lot of it boils down to that. We don't want to play something that we know is predictable. That's why we have dice. Otherwise, it would just be a story that we read from a book altogether. But just so you don't get a wrong impression when we are saying like this, we're not saying that games that are quote unquote simulated don't subvert expectations. Every monster you see, when you see it for the first time, might be behaving a certain way. There are also dice on the GM's part of the screen, so uncertainty is still there. I'm aware that my brain is going all over the place.
Yeah,
but
we're
and
not making a lot of points here.
no, I'm not making a lot of points, but
But there's just a lot of thoughts that we want to just
I would like
share
to
with the
promise
world.
to people that other episodes are gonna be more coherent.
At least we're gonna try to.
We're gonna try, but we don't promise. If you like to listen to two guys sitting and discussing
We
art,
are obviously good at breaking expectations. So.
I mean, we'll see. We'll see. At one point, people will just expect us to go on 7 tangents in one podcast. But isn't that the whole art form of podcasts? Like, yeah,
I agree. I mean, I like it so far.
a strange experience. So, yeah, I think we said all that we want for this one. Do you agree?
I think that's okay.
For all of you that stayed all the way to the end, thank you very much for taking some time from your busy days and dedicating it to two guys talking. I mean, it's not even talking, it's praising the hobby that we all like. And just wanted to say that the main motivation for us doing this is videos that I make are, they I would say bite-sized, but Barlow Keep videos are never bite-sized. But they are a topic that I kind of script and talk about, and it's a done deal. We don't go deeper into it. So I think this podcast is a very good platform for us to go into all of these topics in a deeper way. And I'm sure like there's topics about dreams and visions. I think we can talk about dreams and visions for hours. And also like perception of imaginary spaces, that sort of stuff. How TTRPGs stand next to other art forms, what things are the same, what are different kinds of DMs and artists. Like I can go on forever. I think we have a well that will never go dry when it comes to ideas and interesting topics. And of course, we want to hear your opinions. Don't be too hard on us for the first one, but yeah, we're expecting some feedback. And if you have any ideas from other videos that I made or anyone else has made, just write us a comment and we will consider covering that. And also, if you have any questions, I know I don't answer. I'm a very bad Discord and comment guy. I don't answer things. I say I will do it later and I never do it. So if you have any questions that you want me to answer, that is also a good platform for that. Just write a comment and I will read it. Forget about it until the next episode, and then I might answer it.
We might answer it in our podcast, so make sure you listen to all of them.
Yes, listen to all of them. Well, I would say that is it for this one. Yeah, how do we end this one? Like every other video? We'll see you in the next episode, but until then, I bid you
farewell, keepers.